All right, so I had to go find another dry erase marker. So we're still in the order Lactobacillus. We've covered Lactobacillus. The next thing is the Leuconostoc. Again, these are all gram-positive, and this is a coccus. Not important in medicine as far as I know, but it is important in making fermented foods, as in sauerkraut, and beverages, as in kefir. In both instances, there's an enhanced preservation along with some increase in taste and aroma, particularly with the sauerkraut. So there's a lot of benefits obviously in terms of preservation as well. All right, next we have Enterococcus. Another gram-positive. You can tell by the name, coccus. It forms a diplococcus in culture, and it resembles Streptococcus pneumoniae. All right, so they're both diplococcus in culture. This is part of your normal flora in your intestines. And it can be an opportunistic nosocomial infection like a urinary tract infection. Nosocomial, remember, means hospital-induced. Opportunistic means it's not normally a problem, but it's just taking advantage of a situation. And this would be, for example, in a urinary tract infection, which is abbreviated UTI. All right, and then the last member of this order is the Streptococcus, which sounds familiar because of strep throat. Remember that there are other organisms that start out with strepto because the word strepto just means that they're in a row when you look at them under a microscope. All right, so gram-positive. Cocci, obviously. Forms chains, that's in the name. Some species cause hemolysis and produce exotoxins. Remember we talked about alpha, beta, and gamma in the lab. So alpha hemolysis is a greenish zone due to the production of hydrogen peroxide and some lysis of the red blood cells and oxidation of hemoglobin. Beta hemolytic, the red blood cells are completely blammo, and there's a clear yellow zone around the colony because the exotoxin has caused complete hemolysis. And then lastly, gamma hemolysis, which really isn't. Based on the name, you know that Streptococcus pyogenes is the causative agent of strep throat. If you don't get your strep throat treated, you can then have more prolonged types of infections, as in rheumatic fever, this is characterized by some of the organisms getting in the blood, and you can have damage to the heart valves in rheumatic fever. I had an aunt and an uncle. My uncle was born in 1906. My aunt was born in the teens. They both got strep throat in a time where there were no antibiotics. They both subsequently developed rheumatic fever. And one of them, her death certificate lists rheumatic fever as a cause. That's my Aunt Dorothy. And then my uncle had heart problems, and he died at age 54, probably due to rheumatic fever. And then in some instances, it can cause a cutaneous vasodilation, Streptococcus pyogenes infection, which is known as scarlet fever. All right, so that's some of the bad things that can result as consequence of being infected with this organism. Next, we have the class Bacilli, which you should recall are the other organisms other than the Clostridium that form endospores. So when you study, it's sometimes useful to group things together, like all of the gamma proteobacteria. Remember them all together as a group. Organisms that produce endospores, remember them as a group, gram-positive group, gram-negative group. Non-pathogens group. Anyway, so next up, gram-positive low GC bacteria is the members of the class Bacilli. Bacillus, that is. Genus Bacillus. These are large gram-positive rods, as suggested by their names. They're either aerobes or facultative anaerobes. Clearly different than the Clostridium in that accord. As I said, they form endospores. And this is where you need an endospore stain with malachite green. Bacillus anthracis causes anthrax in cows. It can be transmitted to humans, and in humans it's responsible for spontaneous abortions. It's a weapon that is the so-called weapon that bioterrorism might use, but not really. So the spores are really something that they're really insidious and persistent. So once spores get out in an environment, it's hard not to get infected, and it sounds really, really bad to have anthrax. But just like bubonic plague sounds really bad, but and Lyme disease sounds really bad, but in all three cases, anthrax, Lyme disease, and bubonic plague, a simple round of antibiotics and you're fine. So this is really nothing to be worried about in terms of bioterrorism. So I always just shake my head. Bacillus ceres. That sounds like cereal. It actually has the same, let's see, C-E-R-E, like cereal, as in breakfast cereal. Same word, so this has to do with grain. And related to that, it may cause food poisoning. Okay, so just like Clostridium botulinum and some others. All right, the other related organism that's also a member of the class Bacillus and related to the genus Bacillus is the genus Staphylococcus. No, non-metal. It's like non-modal. So these are stupid spell checks. So gram-positive, non-modal. So a gram-positive, non-modal coccus. I remember Dr. Nez saying that they form grape-like clusters. They live on your skin, so they tolerate high salt just like the Micrococcus does. So remember the mannitol salt agar in the lab, 7.5% sodium chloride. So this will grow on it. They are facultative anaerobes. You should know what that means both for lecture and for lab. They produce catalase, which you should know what that is for lecture and lab. Remember, that's the enzyme that neutralizes two H2O2s and turns them into H2O and O2. There is a pathogenic strain of Staphylococcus aureus that makes coagulase and clots your blood, so your white blood cells don't have access. So ACE means it's an enzyme. Coagula means it clumps blood. And it's an exoenzyme and an exotoxin. Coagulates the blood. All right, if this one sounds pretty innocent, it's not. So this is the essay of MRSA. As a methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus and VRSA, vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So Staphylococcus aureus is the SA of MRSA and VRSA. And these are really bad nosocomial infections. They are highly antibiotic resistant because, what's a bacteria going to do if it wants to grow in a hospital environment? It needs to pick up and evolve lots of resistance factors, and so it's us against them in terms of this evolutionary foot race of who can come up with a better strategy of defeating who first. And of course now we're running in a point where the antibiotics that were developed in the 1940s and have been modified since no longer work. And like I said, it's a matter of economics. They could find new and better bacteria, new and better antibiotics, but there's no financial incentive, to make something that you take 10 weeks of, or 10 days of every 2 years. All right, other things that you should know about Staphylococcus is these are enterotoxins. They can cause food poisoning. Entero is a word that means intestines. They can cause toxic shock syndrome. All right, and what happens is, again, there's endotoxins that are produced that cause a person's immune system to get incredibly revved up to the point where they develop shock. Skin infections. You really don't want this organism to be around a burn victim. It can cause boils, carbuncles, cellulitis, or impetigo. And I've already mentioned MRSA and VRSA. So these are very highly resistant strains of Staphylococcus aureus. The M is, I believe, methicillin, and the V I know is vancomycin. All right, the very last thing you need to know in this very long chapter about classification and description of these organisms and some introduction into the diseases that they cause. So last thing you need to know is a low GC gram-positive bacteria that's responsible for walking pneumonia. And the one that's responsible for walking pneumonia also has some filamentous properties, so there's myco in the name, just like in Mycobacterium, but don't get them confused. It's called Mycoplasma. So these are so tiny that they cannot be gram stained, so these are what we would call an atypical staining. So they're too small to be visualized with the gram stain. They are what we call pleomorphic. Pleo means many. Morph is shape. So this has can take on different shapes. So it's not a bacillus, it's not a coccus. And like I said, the one you need to know is Mycoplasma pneumoniae, which causes walking pneumonia. All right, and so that's it for what I expect you to know out of Chapter 4.